With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Lamed. Yoma Daf Lamed on top of the Amid is focusing on the two final dinim that we have on the Mishnah and Daf Chav Ches. And I'm reading the Mishnah now on the Seder of the Mishnah. That number one, Kol HaMeisech Es Raglov, that every time a Kohen has a bowel movement. Literally, Meisech Raglov means when he covers his legs, because when he would crouch down, his legs would be covered. So let's use the words of the Mishnah, that whenever a Kohen is Meisech Raglov, he has to go to the mikveh. The final din in the Mishnah is V'chol HaMeitel Mayim, every time a Kohen is urinating, every time he is Meitel Mayim, Ton Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, he has to sanctify his hands and his feet from the shiur. We already began learning the top of the Amud at the end of yesterday's shiur regarding Meitel Mayim. Why does he have to wash his hands? And we spoke out the topic, the conversation amongst the Rishonim. Whether one nowadays who goes to the bathroom, who urinates, whether that person who has to wash his hands, whether they make the bracha al netilas yadayim, and we said that they do not make al netilas yadayim. Actually, something very interesting can be derived from it. When do we make the al netilas yadayim? Well, number one, every time we wake up in the morning, right in the beginning of Birchas HaShachar, and number two, whenever we wash our hands, Ketakonas Shloima HaMelech, he began with the takon of a kohen washing one's hands before eating kachim. Remember? And then it extended. Every time a kohen eats truma, you have to wash your hands. And then we said that every time, even a Yisrael has a meal, has a seudah, meaning every time we eat bread, we have to wash our hands, and we make a bracha by that hand washing. So it comes out that the al netilas yadayim is really a future-oriented bracha, meaning that when we are about to start our avodas hayom, whether it is the kohen in the Beis HaMikdash, whether we begin the day by davening, by learning, or by learning and by davening, really everything we do during the day should be part of our service to God. And we are beginning the day where we wash our hands and we say a bracha al netilas yadayim. Prior to having a meal, again, we are washing our hands in order to have the meal. It's a future-oriented washing. We make a bracha al netilas yadayim. Masha'enken, when the person goes to the restroom, right, even if the hands got soiled and he washes off his hands, but that entire washing is pass-oriented. It's like a sud meirah. It's only about getting rid of something that's impure, b'negei of the past. Now, parenthetically, when we wake up after sleeping, there's also a ruach ra'ah that's on the hands. But truth be told, that ruach ra'ah will be on our hands even if we sleep during the day for 30 minutes or more. And for that we have to wash our hands, but we also don't make a al netilas yadayim. In other words, when it's only about the past and getting rid of tumah, then we don't make the bracha. But if it's b'negei to that which we need to do, that is when we make the bracha, interestingly, of al netilas yadayim. In other words, when the kohen would wash his yadayim v'raglayim, every morning he would make a bracha, and there's a whole discussion as to what's the nusach of that about that bracha. But all of that is something that we already touched at the end of last year. Today we will begin on Daf Lamed, fourth line from the top of the Amid. Here we're going to begin with a Rav Papa statement. And Rav Papa is basing a statement on the second to last din in the Mishnah, that every time a kohen was Meisech Raglov, he needed to immerse himself in a mikvah. And as we just spoke out, and the Meiri says, and the other Rishonim say, that's primarily to make sure that if there's any tsoya, excrement stuck on the body, it gets washed off. So what will be the halacha if there's any tsoya on a person's body, whether they are allowed to read the Shema or not? Now really this is going to be linked, as the Gemara will link it, to a discussion that we had in Brachas Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, and there we already had a Mishnah, and there's a whole conversation, there's a Rav Huna, and there's a Rav Chizda, all of which will be brought down here on Daf Lamed, followed by a similar discussion, as we will see, and that is that if a person washed one's hands for eating as one has to do, and in the middle of the Su'udah the person walked out, and the person lingered outside the place of the meal for a halachic substantial amount of time. Rashi here writes for 1 hour or 2. So then the halacha will be that when the person comes back in, the person will again have to wash one's hands. And the discussion will be where can you wash your hands even outside? Or do we say the concept of chashad, that in order for people not to suspect that you just came back in after all that time and you sat back down and you're eating bread without re-washing, people will suspect that you did the wrong thing. So in order for you to rise above that suspicion, you have to wash dafke in front, indoors, in front of the group. etc. And that will be Bachlal, that will touch upon this topic, which is, when do we say that a person has to take into account what others might think of him or of her, and do things accordingly, not the way they ideally would like to do it, and when do we say, no, there is a boundary. I'm doing the right thing. What you think about me, that's your problem, that's not my problem. And we'll have a beautiful boundary here before the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah here on Amud Aleph is going to introduce the rule, and that rule is really not only to a kohen, but it is to any yid, that even if the person, to their knowledge, they are completely pure, they are tahir, when you enter the azara, or wording it the way the Mishnah says it, ein adam nichnas la azara, even tahir, without prior to the entry going to the mikvah. And we're going to have in the Gemara a Braisa that's going to quote the Machlekes Tanoim, Ben Zoyma, Rabbi Yehuda, as to the reason for that. And on the Flamet Amid Beis, we will actually discover that there are other Tanoim, and in certain Braisas, they are the Chachamim, that disagree with this halacha, and they hold that if a person, to their knowledge, knows that they are tahar, they don't have a doubt, they know that they're tahar, then they don't have to immerse themselves. And we will learn many or more pratim, benegeya, all of the above. Chavra, let us start on the Flamet Amud Aleph, again at the end of the fourth line from the top of the Amid, Amar Rav Papa. Based on the second to last rule in the Mishnah on Daf Chav Ches, Kol HaMeisech Raglov has to go to the mikvah, because the body has to be physically clean. So Amar Rav Papa, Tsoya b'mekayma, that if after a bowel movement there is some remnants of the excrement of the tsoya that is in its place, nevertheless, since it's there, it's on the outside part of the body, then asur likrois kriya shema, then this person may not read the Shema. And now the Gemara has to make a very important clarification. Says the Gemara, asks the Gemara, hey Chidami, what exactly is the case of Rav Papa? Idenidis, if it's visible. Now we're speaking about a person that's clothed. Visible means that if the person would not be wearing clothing, if the excrement is on a part of his flesh where without clothes it would be visible, then Pshita asks the Gemara, why do I need to have an Amoida to tell us this din? Really, the Mishnah in Brachas. There's a Mishnah in Brachas, Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis, that tells us that a person has to distance oneself 4 amis from excrement, from tsoya, before praying, before saying Shema, before learning Torah. So if it's not bachlal on my body, but it's within my dalad amis, I am prohibited in uttering these holy words. So certainly if it's on my body and it's nidis, and now as we'll see in a moment, again, it's not visible because the person is clothed, but l'chu'ura, that's the approach, there is the bad odor from it, then of course, from the Mishnah, we already know that a person is not allowed to read Shema, so why do I need Rav Papa? Elot must be, the loy nidis, that even if the person will not be clothed, it would not be visible. So Bazoi, we are challenging the rule of Rav Papa. Why should that person be prohibited to read the Shema? That level of cleanliness is something that's very not practical. And as the Chazal say various times, including here, that the Torah was not given to ministering angels that B'chlal don't have to relieve themselves. So if this person, is clean, and it's loy nidis, so what's the problem? So says the Gemara loy, that not Rav Papa's din was needed, tzricha de yoshev v'nidis. If the person would be sitting down, the body opens up more, then it would be visible. When the person is standing, if the person is standing, then ve'eino nidis, then it's not visible. In that case, if we would only have the Mishnah in Brachas, it's not subject to the Mishnah in Brachas. Because since oimed ve'eino nidis, and the person now is standing, let's go for sure with that, then based on that Mishnah, we wouldn't know automatically that you're not allowed to read Shema, so that's the Chiddush of Rav Papa, that nevertheless, since if the person would sit down, it would be nidis, you can't read the Shema. So asks the Gemara, well, if that's the case, umayshna mitzoya al b'saroi. Now we did have a discussion, and Machlokes is also in Barachas, between Rav Huna and Abchizda regarding if there's excrement on any part of the person's flesh, and we will try to avoid to have a three-way machlokes amoirayim. So let's first focus on their machlokes. The itman, as we learned in Berachos, if there is tsoya on any part of one's flesh, or if a person's hand, a smaller part of one's body, only one's hand, is inside a latrine, inside a beis hakisei, and especially when the beis hakisei has a bad odor. So there, Rav Huna says, muter likrois kriya shema. Rav Huna holds that, as we learned in Berachos, that even though when there is a bad odor, a person should not be saying the Shema, but as he quoted there, the pasuk koil haneshama tahalel, that if there is some dirt on the organs of the body through which a person breathes, which is the nose and the mouth or near that area, that's a problem. But if it's on any part of the person's flesh, but not near, and the person is not smelling it, then they have no problem. Rav Chizda says, Asur likres kriya shema, that no, that even if it's only on any part of one's flesh, even if one's hand is in the latrine, you can't read the Shema, but as Rashi clarifies, Rashi 7 lines from the top of the Amid, that's because there is a pasuk in Tehillim that we actually say every Shabbos, and that is Kol Atzmoisai Toimarno. That when I talk to God, all of my bones are talking to God. By the way, that's one of the sources for shaking, for shuckling during davening. So he holds that if there's one bone, one part of the body that has tsoya on it, then you can't fulfill the Kol Atzmoisai Toimarno. But even according to Rab Chizda, if it's not about the issue of Kol Atzmoisai Toimarno, simply by the fact that there might be some bad odor because there is something on one's flesh, but it's on a limb, it's not right near your nose and the mouth. If not for Kol Atzmoisai, then there would not be a problem. And we understand that Rav Papa's issue is not only because then you can't say that all of your limbs are involved in davening. He holds that to be something more problematic. So that bothers us. So the Gemara says, no. That Rav Papa and Rav Huna and Rav Chizda are not arguing at all with each other. In other words, indeed, what we just quoted from Brachos, there the topic is not about whether there's a bad odor or not. But the question is, since there's tsoya on one of the limbs of the person, so then you don't have the fulfillment of the entire body is serving God because one part is soiled. Rav Huna is not worried about it. Rav Chizda is worried about it. Here, the case of Rav Papa is that there's a bad odor. And even though it's not nidus, it's only nidus when the person is sitting down, but this is a technical thing that b'mekoima, since the excrement is in the place where it comes out from, so therefore nafish zuhamam, the bad odor is more substantial. That's the problem that Rav Papa has. However, shaloi b'mekoima, which is where Rav Huna and Rav Chizda are having their machlokes, since loy nafish zuhama, since it doesn't smell as bad, that's why, again, Rav Chizda subscribes to something even more, also likras kriya shema because of Kol Atzmoisai Toimarno, and Rav Huna rejects that, but that's not the case of Rav Papa. And just to finish with this topic, which is very practical, sad but practical, that when people are in the hospital, and some people will need to have some sort of catheter, or they can have other instruments through which their body waste goes out. So there's a lot of discussion as to, could you daven in that room? Can the patient daven in that room? And a part of that discussion and part of the hetainim is based on the fact that, first of all, the utensils that hold it are disposables. So it's not an ovid shalmei raglayim. And especially since there is no bad odor. That's why many poskim are very lenient, especially for the patient, that he has no other option other than, maybe some people say it should be covered. Then there is the tube that cannot be covered. That's a very interesting topic that we should only learn about and never have to undergo with God's help. All right. Says the Gemara Vayta. Tanach we learned in a brayso that this is the following halacha regarding a meal. Adam yoytze lahashtin mayim. If a person goes out to urinate during the meal, connected to what we learned above in the Amid, all he needs to do is wash one hand. Why does he have to wash one hand? So again, as we just learned, that even in the Beis HaMikdash, if not for one's obligation to rub off any droplets of urine, b'chlal, you would not have to wash your hands. And even though but a person does have to wash off the netzoitzos. Now in the Beis HaMikdash, either you wash your hands or you don't. There's no such a thing of being mekadesh one hand. But when it comes to our halacha, if a person went just for meid raglaim. That means he did not make a large interruption. If there is any soiling, if there's any urine on one's hand, then you have to wash it off. So enachanami. So take the one hand that Rashi says that you used to rub off the netzoitzos and wash that hand, and you're good to go. Diberim chaveiroi. If you went out, even if you went out because you needed to be mashten mayim, but now that you were out, is a practical example. You started to have a conversation with your friend. So here, and the question will be, is there a point in time where we say that you left the meal for such a long amount of time, now that you came back in, you got to wash netilas yadayim again? Let's not forget that there's a klal that one's hands are busy, and if a person is not making extra effort to keep one's mind on one's hands, where is it touching and where is it not touching, then stam yadayim become shniyos, and you have to wash them again. In other words, we presume that if a person is not being mindful, which we are during a meal, but not mindful if you're outside schmoozing with your friend, that it might have touched a part of the body upon which there was some sort of sweat that is hardened, that halachically will bring a certain rabbinic impurity upon your hands, for which you have to wash again. So says the Braisa that if you were schmoozing out there for a extended period of time, interesting, Rashi here writes, what does hiflik mean? Practically he writes 1 or 2 hours, and that's always the big question. We'll make up your mind, is it 1 or 2 hours? But we'll leave the question open. So then says the Braisa, here you're ready, you have to wash your hands again. This is not about getting rid of any urine that might be on your hand. This now, that you had Hesach Hadas, this is the din, the takana of Shlomo HaMelech, that we all have to wash our hands before we begin a meal. And not only that, another prat, and when you wash your hands, lo yitel mi bachutz, don't wash it outside. Why is and then enter and just sit down and eat? Mipnei chashad, because a person might suspect that you b'chlal did not wash your hands. Some of the application of these halachas changes nowadays because of the plumbing and the facility that everyone has to water. But then people didn't have water, nothing as near as it is readily available nowadays. And yeah, you have to make sure that people see that you washed your hands, because they're going to suspect that you won't wash it again. For sure, everyone is going to wash it the first time, but why would you wash it again? So, but since you don't want people to suspect you, elenichnas, come back in. Sit in your place, sit around the table. And then, wash both of your hands. And there was a special pitcher that they had designated for netilas yadayim called a tofiach. And al ha'orchim. Not only do you wash your hands in front of everyone else, but you pass the pitcher around. In other words, you make an extra effort for everyone to see that you had the pitcher, which means that you washed your hands again as you had to. However, on that Amar Rav Chizda, that lo yamaron says Rashi that you should not wash your hands outside. In other words, that you have to take into account that people might suspect you. That's only if your intention to come back in. Don't forget, you were out for an hour or two, which means that probably you finished your meal. If you would be hungry, you would not leave the steak on the table and go schmooze with your friend for 2 hours. Why are you coming back in? Because it was common that even after you ate, today many people say they come back to eat dessert. What was very common then is that people used to have drinking sessions. They would sit down together and they would drink wine. And if all you would do would be to drink wine, you b'chlal don't have to wash your hands. Elama, since other people were eating, as you were, and there might still be bread on the table, so there is a chashash that once you are already sitting down to drink wine, you might eat bread. That's why they said you have to wash your hands. Now, that far-fetched reason is something that some would not take seriously. Some would not wash. They would just say, listen, I finished my meal, I already had my schmooze outside, I only came back in here to drink wine, I won't wash my hands. So when there's a certain amount of people that didn't wash their hands, wrongfully, Chazal said you should, that is where there's a concept of chashad, dafka, to wash in front of the group. Avol le'echol, but if you are coming back in to eat, you're going to sit back down there and you're going to right away eat bread. So then, of course, you're going to wash your hands. And therefore, then you can wash your hands outside, because the meida yodia, it's surely known that the anina dati, that a person has enough of a delicate nature, as we all should have to be edel, that after a person went to the bathroom, if they're now going to go and eat bread, unlike drinking, then you drink, you put the liquid in a cup. Eating today, people have cutlery. Then they did not have cutlery. People knew for sure you're going to wash. No one would be chayshid you. And therefore you can wash outside. And on that, based on that, Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, va'ano, someone like me, even if I only re-entered, afilu lishtois. Rav Nachman was of such delicate nature that if he went to the bathroom, he would always wash his hands. Nami meida yodia da'anina datoy. I'm very delicate of nature, and once a person is washing their hands, no one is going to be choshid you that you're not going to wash it the way you have to wash it dafka as netilas yodayim. Of course you're going to do that. Don't forget, people know the halacha b'su'uda. In other words, when do I have to take into account that someone might suspect me? That's if many people are not doing what Chazal want, and there is a certain rational justification not to do what Chazal said. I have to make there an extra effort to make it clear that I'm doing exactly what the Chachamim told me to do. But whenever people are obeying what Chazal said, and like over here, anyways, people are washing their hands. So of course they're going to wash it properly. Here is where you don't have to be worried about what people will think or what they won't think. You wash your hands wherever it's more convenient for you. Okay, Chavra, moving on to the new Mishnah. And as we mentioned in the intro, this Mishnah is not only focusing on a kohen. This Mishnah is going to be a rule for all of the Yidden. Says the Mishnah, Ein Adam Nichnas La'azara. Now here we have the word la'avoida, but look inside the Rashi. Rashi writes la'avoida is lav dafke. It's not about a kohen doing the avoida. The truth is, whenever we enter the Beis Hamikdash, all of that is coined a avoida. Even Yisrael b'ma'amadon. We're not going in there to tour. We're going in there as to serve God in any way that God wants for us to serve Him. But clearly, this is not about a kohen, as Rashi says. So, ein adam nichnas la'azara la'avoida. Even if, as far as the person knows, he's tahor. In other words, there's someone who knows they're tamei. Then there's someone that doesn't know. But even if the person says, no, I'm mindful about my status, and I'm tahor. Nevertheless, you have to go to the mikvah. At sheyit boil. Why? We'll see in the Gemara. And the Gemara is going to quote a Tana. The Gemara is going to quote Tanoim as to why. Next in, now again we are segueing back into Yom Kippur. Says the Mishnah, so every time a Yid walked into the Azara, and a Kohen as well, they went to the mikvah. But that was a one-time thing. And also, as we learned in the Mishnah and the Peirik in the beginning, Daf Chav Ches, if the person was Meisech Raglov, then he went to the mikvah again. But on Yom Kippur, lechatchila, a kohen, the kohen gadol knew he's going to the mikvah 5 times. Chamesh tvilos, and therefore va'asara kedushin toivel kohen gadol umakadosh bay bayom. He would on the bay bayom, on the day of Yom Kippur, he's going to immerse himself 5 times, and there's going to be 10 sanctifications of his hand and his feet. Generally, as we'll see in the Gemara, prior and post every Tefilla, he would sanctify his hands and his feet. I'm saying generally because when it comes to the first tefillah, that's not necessarily the case. The first tefillah being the one that everyone does, including the kohen gadol, he'll actually do that tefillah outside the mikvah that was in the azara, because you can't even enter the azara prior to going to the mikvah. And vekulam meaning the 4 of the 5 needed to be done by kodesh in a place that is sanctified with the kedusha of the azara. Now, where was the mikvah for the kohen gadol? That was, we already spoke about this earlier, al beis haparva, on the chamber that's called the parva chamber, that had in it a proper mikvah. However, now that we began the Mishnah by saying ein adam nichnas lazar lavoida boil, which means the kohen gadol, even though he was shivas yamim, he was quarantined. Right? We learned that Rav Meir that they sprinkled the waters of the red heifer on him every day or almost every day. Doesn't matter. He can be taught. He has to go to the mikvah, but he can't even enter before going to the mikvah. So the first mikvah needed to be outside the kodesh, chutz mizu, aside of the first one. Furthermore, this is again a specific din on Yom Kippur. Now we're going to stick to Yom Kippur, that whenever the mikveh necessitated for there to be privacy for the kohen gadol, because there were other people present. Since the avodah of Yom Kippur for the kohen gadol is dafka with linen garments, yeah, he did wear for the avodah that was done outside of the Kodesh Kodshim, the Shmoyne Begadim. But what is unique about Yom Kippur? That when he entered Lefnai V'Lefnim, it was only in Bud, right, or on Big Day Sheish. So therefore, Peiris Usad and Shal Butz, Bein Levein Ha'am, when they would extend a sheet of to give him privacy, on Yom Kippur, the sheet would dafka be made out of linen. And we're not going to read the words for Kiddush of Viragalav, as we just spoke out, that the first going to the mikvah, which is for which he needed to have this quiet, private corner. That is where they were paid susadin. But over there he says Kiddush of Viragalav is something that lav dafka happened, especially before going to this mikvah, because he's going out of his big day choil to the big day kodesh, not changing from the shmeina begadim to the arba begadim. Because we keep it in parentheses, we don't have that in our gears. Okay, the Gemara is going to focus on the first din of the Mishnah. Not Yom Kippur, also Yom Kippur, but on every Yid, anytime, ein adam nichnas la'azara, as we said, even tahar, ad she yitboil, says the Gemara sha'alu es ben zoymer. This is a braisa. We will actually call this braisa number 1 because between the end of the Amid and Daf Lamed Amid Beis, we're going to end up learning 3 braisas, and some of it will be very enlightening. We'll learn new dinim. But let's begin. Braisa number 1. Sha'alu es ben zoymer. They asked the Tana ben zoymer. Tefilla zu lama. No, it's if there's a suffix, we get it. But if a person is saying, no, I am mindful about my status of Tum and Tara, I know that I'm Tar. You have to go to the mikvah. Why? So Amar Lahem, and he came with the following Kal v'chaimer. Uma hameshanem. When the one who switches, he's referring to the Kohen Gadol's switching of garments, between the 8 garments to the 4 garments to the 8 garments. And mikodesh lekodesh. Both of these garments are holy vestments. And furthermore, he wore the Shmeina Begadim when he did the Avodah in a holy place. In a holy place in the Heichel, to which if a person would be Tamei, there would be Chayiv Kodesh for entering there. When he would wear the 4 linen garments, he would be going inside the Holy of Holies. Even holier, but the same rule into a location where if someone is Tamei, who God forbid enters, there is Chayiv Kodesh. Umimakim she'anush Kodesh, l'makim she'anush Kodesh. So he's going from holy to holy, from a restricted area to a restricted area, and nevertheless, as we'll have psukim, we'll learn about this inside, ta'un tefilla, he's obligated, right? There's actually a positive commandment, a mitzvah saseh, for the Kohen Gadol to go to the mikvah. So based on that, says Ben Zoyma, hamashana mechayla kodesh, when he's going out of his mundane clothing to holy clothing, and when he's going from being in a area that's not called holy. It's not called holy, doesn't have the Kedushas, right? The Lishkas Parhedrin does not have the Kedushas Ha'azara, right? And indeed, if someone is Tamei there, there's no Einish of Kodesh. Even though we also already mentioned that Midrabanan from the Soireg inside, that means in the Chayil and in the Ezras Nashim, if someone had Tumas Meis, they would not be allowed to enter. All of that is Midrabanan. So and now he's beginning the day's avodah. And again, this goes even to any kohen, but we're focusing now on the kohen gadol. Is einoidin shaton tefillah. This goes on anyone because we're going from outside the azara, from outside, let's say machne shchina, to inside machne shchina. So of course you have to go to the mikveh. And as we'll see explicitly on Amid Beis, a kal v'chomer means it's a din do'eraisa. It's from the Yud Gimel Midas. So holds Ben Zoyma. That means we are biblically obligated. You enter the Azara, you got to go to the mikveh. However, the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda says, second to last line, no. Srach tvila hizu. It's only, srach means it's an attachment, but it means here it's a reminder. You don't have to go to the mikveh, midoy raisa. The Chachamim said go to the mikveh. Why? Because when a person is going to the mikveh, they begin to think, 1 second, I'm going to the mikveh, maybe I am Tamei. They begin to think back at where they were, what they might have touched, and it could be that someone became Tamei and they forgot about it, they think they're Tahor, but now that they're going through the motions of going into the mikveh, it will help them remember that they are already Tamei. Kedei sheyizkar tuma, yishana shebiyada, he might have already been Tamei and old Tuma, and if we remember it, that's great, then V'yifresh. I'm saying V'yifresh because if a person is Taka Tamei, well, there's different levels of Tuma. If a person has Tamei Sheretz, then they can't just go to the mikveh and go inside, then they have to have at least a head of Shemesh. If a person will remember that they are Tamei B'Tumas Meis, then you have to have the 7 days, etc., etc. In other words, it's a rabbinic obligation to help a person remember just in case. But Michael Miflagi, meaning what will be the practical difference between Ben Zoyma and Rabbi Yehuda? Daf Lamed Amid Beis says the Gemara like this: Ba'achulei avoida komifligam. If a kohen, now let's go on a kohen who's doing the avoida. If he did not toivel himself, whether his lack of immersion will invalidate, will be mechel, will desecrate the avodah that he does. Leben Zoyma, according to Ben Zoyma, that it is a biblical obligation. That's the Rashi on top of the first top line. So then it makes sense, since he violated a biblical obligation, then indeed, whatever he did that day, terribly, became deconsecrated, became chulin. However, let Rabbi Yehuda, which it's only a derabanan, God forbid, we're not minimizing a derabanan, but if he didn't do it, so then he violated. But the avodah remains a good avodah. Loi machel avodah counters the Gemara. Hold on, ula ben zoyma mi machel. How can you say, even according to Ben Zoyma, if he didn't go to the mikvah, whatever he did will become chulin? It can be, because v'hatanya. Don't forget, Ben Zoyma makes a kal v'chomer from the fact that we see in the Torah that a kohen gadol has to go to the mikvah various times on Yom Kippur. Kodesh l'kodesh. Now we have a rule called diyoi, sufficient, that a derived law from a kal v'chomer cannot be more stringent than the source law. So let's go to the source law. Frekti Gemara. Kohen gadol shaloi taval, and v'loi kidesh, as he should, bein beged lebeged, or bein avoida la'avoida. The Braisa writes explicitly, nevertheless, avidasa ksheira. So here you see the kasha. Now we're going to just finish quoting the Braisa until the end. And then the Braisa says, echad kohen gadol. However, kohen gadol, the echad kohen hedyet, if shaloi kiddush adav aglav, when in the morning before they begin their day and they did avodah, then their avodah is invalidated. But the question is not coming from someone who was not mekadosh adav aglav. We're learning about whether someone who did not go to the mikvah, whether it's going to be machel, whether it's going to make chulin, whether it's going to desecrate the avodah. No, if the kal v'chomer is from a kohen gadol, it can't be more chomer than the din of a kohen gadol. And a chanami. So the Gemara therefore says that the nafkamina will be elo lamekam ba'asei komifligi. In other words, is there a positive obligation? And if you didn't do it, did you violate a positive obligation? Leben zoyma ko'i ba'asei. It's amazing. No, it's since, as Rashi already tells us the pasuk that we have during Yom Kippur, right? Vayikra and Achrei Mois, where it says v'rachatz es b'sorei b'mayim ulevesham. That is the specific mikveh that the kohen gadol goes to, the immersion, prior to changing into his other garments. So, and this is a kal v'chomer from the kohen gadol, so there's a positive commandment that was violated. However, ule Rabbi Yehuda loy koy ba'asei. Okay. So now we have the machlokes, and now the Gemara is going to challenge the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda with Rabbi Yehuda. Fragt the Gemara, mi is leil Rabbi Yehuda haisvara. Does Rabbi Yehuda subscribe to what we just said before? Now, at least right now, it's not about the svara of Rabbi Yehuda, and that is that it's a derabanan. But B'chlal, does Rabbi Yehuda agree with the din of the Mishnah? I mean, the Mishnah makes a statement, it's a stam Mishnah, that ein adam nichnas la'azara, period. Right? La'avoida, afilu toir, atche yidboil. We're going to see that l'chora Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with it. Ve'hatanya, now this Braisa is referring to the following. When a Mitzayra is rid of the signs of tzaras, and he has to undergo a very sophisticated, complicated procedure for him or for her to become completely pure. And there is the body shaving, and then there's the 7 days, and then there is on the 7th day the second body shaving and the mikvah. And at the end of all that, then on the 8th day, the Mitzayra has to bring the 3 karbanos for him to be allowed from then on to eat kachim. That's the final stage of his purification process. Now, says the Braisa that Mitzayra has to go to the mikvah on the 8th day. Now, by the way, he has to go to the mikvah on the 7th day. So we're going to be focusing on this tefillah on the 8th day. And having said that, he's not allowed to enter Machna Shechina because a mechuser kippurim, until his karbanis are brought, Taka cannot enter Machna Shechina. And we just spoke out earlier on in the Masechta that even though the temple complex, right, begins, let's say, from the Soidek, from the Chel, from the Ezras Nashim, going from east to west, but really the Kedusha of the Azara, Machna Shechina, begins with Ezras Yisro. And we also learned that the Niknor gate, which separated the Ezras Nashim from the Ezras Yisrael, underneath that gate itself, that's not part of Kedushas Hazara. And it needed to be that way. Because normally if a person is a Mechusar Kippurim, so they are outside the Azara, the Karbanos are brought on their behalf, and then they're good. Then they can eat kachim, they can enter the Azara. But the uniqueness about a Mitzayre is that one of his three Karbanos, one of her three karbanis, which is the karban asham, not only does it have to be brought on their behalf, but some of the blood of the karban has to be smeared on the cartilage of the right ear, on their right thumb, on their right big toe. And the blood of the asham may not be taken out of the azara. Psul yoitze, and similarly the loig of oil that comes with the asham also has to be smeared on those same body parts, and it also has kedusha, and it also may not be taken out of the azara. So here you have a problem. So he's not allowed to enter because he didn't have his kapara yet, but he can only get his kapara when the avodah is done properly. But that has to be smeared on his body. So the solution was that he stood in the doorway of Shad Niknor. He only inserted his ear, and then his thumb, and then his big right toe. And as we'll learn, God willing, on Daf Lamed Aleph, this concept of bia b'miktzah, shma bia, lav shma bia. But that's what happened. And he stood there waiting to get the blood and the oil applied on him. Now, why would he have to go to the mikvah? Now we already have an understanding. Ein adam nichnas la'azara elim kein at sheyitboil. And even though he's not fully entering, but some of his body parts will be going inside the azara. So he went to the mikvah on the 8th day. That's the Tanach. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, ein tzarech tefilla, because shekvar taval min ba'erev. He already went to the mikvah earlier on. Hold on. It must be, we're going to call this Braisa number 2. Now we're learning a Shita, Rabbi Yehuda, which says that he did not have to go to the mikvah. He already went to the mikvah on the 7th day. So what? What was the whole din that we learned in the Mishnah, that even if a person is pure, they're not going to the mikvah pass oriented. They're not going to the mikvah to take away tumah. No, they're going into the azara, kedusha yisera, going to the mikvah. And if Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the Mishnah, then how can he say that ein tzarech tefillah? If you think about it for a moment, you'll have right away the answer. What did we learn in the Gemara? The Gemara brought the Braisa number 1. Machloikas ben Zoyme and Rabbi Yehuda. Why does the Mishnah say that he has to go to the mikvah? Now Ben Zoyme has a kal v'chomer, it's a mitzvah saseh, and therefore it's unequivocal, it's unqualified, it's always. Rabbi Yehuda gave a reason. He said it's only a midrabanan, to help the person remember a tumah yeshana. That's not shayich over here. He's a mitzayra. He underwent the whole procedure of ta'ara. He just went to the mikvah yesterday. What, he's going to forget from yesterday to today? That's not shayich. So that's the answer. It's such a big answer. Like what's even the question? Answers the Gemara. Hahu? No. Kedetani taima shekfar toval mi ba'erev. Rabbi Yehuda in Braisa number 2 noch writes. He says don't go to the mikvah because he just went to the mikvah on the 7th day. And Dafke Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasi, that the reason for our Mishnah is only a midrabanan, to help him remember sarach. Here there wasn't enough time for him to forget. Now this answer is so strong that the Gemara says uta ka'arila. Literally ka'ara means those who were involved, but it means those who asked, those who brought this Braisa number 2. What was even the problem? My ka'arila. The Gemara says no, you stopped in the middle. They understood that. They quoted one Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda, we're calling this Braisa number 2. They were going to go to a third Braisa, and now the Gemara will quote their continuation. Mishum de kabayla mir machrite alei. They wanted to compare Braisa number 2 to a Braisa number 3. And here we'll have a problem, because here we're going to find a contradiction, Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda. And let's go into Braisa number 3. Braisa number 3 is speaking, it's a Braisa in Midos, and here we're speaking about what was where in the temple complex. Guys, we just learned about all this. So there was in the northwestern corner of Ezras Nashim, there was, right, every corner had a chamber. There was what we call the Lishkas HaMitzoraim. And what was that chamber used for? Says the Braisa, Shesham Mitzoraim Toivlin. They went to the mikveh there. Don't forget again that Ezras Nashim is outside the Azara. Says Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, don't say that only the Mitzrayim. I know it's called on their name, but he makes a point that Lo Mitzrayim Belvad Amru, Elo Kol Adam, Zakt Rashi, Elo Kol Adam, any person hanichnas la'azara, not only the Mitzrayim, but every person went to the mikveh there. In other words, the Kohen Gadol we learned in the previous Perek had a mikveh built in, not on the Azara, right near or on the opposite side of the courtyard from the Lishkas Parhedrin, but that was used by the Kohen Gadol. That wasn't a public mikveh. Where did everyone go to the mikveh? Says Rabbi Yehuda, not only Bilvad, but also Kol Adam. Now, Bilvad means, like Rashi says, is that he agrees that the Mitzrayim went to the mikveh. Now we got a problem. In other words, Braisa number 2, clearly Rabbi Yehuda says that the Mitzrayim does not go to the mikveh. And that fits with the first Braisa we learned on Amud Aleph. That Rabbi Yehuda explained the reason of the Mishnah is that the Rabbanan, it's not shaykh by a Mitzrayim. Here in Braisa number 3, it says clearly that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a Mitzrayim would go to the mikveh. And really that's the meaning of their question, Umi islay le Rabbi Yehuda hay svarim. Well, it's based on Ben Zoyma, doesn't make a difference. You always have to go to the mikveh. But if Rabbi Yehuda Taka subscribes to the Svara, such a Svara does not exist by a Mitzrayim. And in Braisa number 3, I mean, he's not focusing on the Mitzrayim, but the fact that he adds not only the Mitzrayim, again the words, Loi Mitzrayim Bilvad, that means a Mitzrayim also, so a Mitzrayim will go to the mikvah on the 8th day, and that's a problem. And for that, the Gemara gives many answers. So answer number 1, attempt number 1, Loi Kasha, no. Ha, let's go just numbers. Ha meaning Braisa number 2, that says that the Mitzrayim does not go, that's because the Tavel, because he went on the 7th day. Perhaps Braisa number 3 is speaking about the unique circumstance where the Mitzrayim did not Tavel on day number 7. The Loi Tavel, then he has to go to the mikvah on day number 8 because he's putting his ear or thumb in the Azara. The Gemara says that can't be. Take that out. This is rejected because either Loi Tavel, if there's any Braisa addressing such a case, then head of Shemesh Boyim, then it's not enough for the Kohen only to go to the mikvah. That means if he's not removed from the Tumah of Tzaras, then even on the 7th day, just going to the mikvah does not allow him to enter at all. He has to wait until it gets dark. So that's zikr, not the case. Elo, take 2. Now this is going to stand. And other answers as well. Idi obviously is that the Mitzrayim went to the mikvah as he has to on the 7th day. If not, don't even come on the 8th day with your 3 karbanis. Elo ma, ha, Braisa number 3 is that even though he went to the mikvah on day number 7, but the asich date, he knows that he diverted his attention and he was not guarding himself from not having any contact with something that could be tamei. So there is a fear, maybe I became tamei. In other words, there's a person knowing that they're tamei. There's a person that knows they're tar, which is what the Mishnah says, and still go to the mikvah. That's what the Mishnah says. And then you have a person that Taka has a doubt. So when does Rabbi Yehuda say that go to the mikvah to help you remember just in case? That's if the beginning point is that you know you're tar. And if a Mitzrayim knows that after the 7th day, from then until now, I was careful, no, that's Braisa number 2. Right? But if he had Hesech Hadas, then he'll go to the mikvah. The Gemara again is going to challenge that. If there is a Mitzrayim that Taka went to the mikvah, but this answer doesn't stand. But he was not mindful to stay away from Tuma sources. At least do your Kisur Kippurim, do your Kapara. So that we have another problem. And that is, what we would say? When it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, if a person does not know that they're not Tamei, they have to be Machmer. And what's Machmer? Maybe you had contact with corpse Tuma, for which the only way you become pure is not just going to the mikvah, and not only 7 days. And the Amar Abdoistoi, guys, we have this in Zvachim, Bar Masain, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that Hesech Hadas Tzorech Hazah Shlishi Yushvi, to enter the Azara. So that's not an answer. Ella says the Gemara, Idi Dolo Yasech Hadati. Both prices is he went to the mikvah on the 7th day. He did not have Hesech Hadas. Second Braisa, the Tavel al Das Bias Migdash, that when he went to the mikvah on the 7th day, not only was the kavana to get rid of the remaining Tuma of Tzaras, But he also had kavana, I'm going to the mikveh in order to be allowed to enter the azara. Even though he knows he's only going to enter the azara on the next day, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not a problem. Going to the mikveh before you enter the azara is only, like we said in the Mishnah, and midrabanan, you might have become tamei. This guy is not becoming tamei. He's mindful not to become tamei. Now, we're going to learn at the end of Chagiga, in the beginning of the third chapter of Chagiga, Gavaldika Klal. Bechlal, for Tara, mikveh does not need kavana. So if a woman, let's say she's a nida, and she fell into a mikveh, she's tahira. Obviously, if there was no chatzitza. And the same thing with all the other tumas, including tumas saras and tumas meis. You don't need kavana. But when it comes to truma and to kachim, there's a new din that when you go to the mikveh, you have to have kavana. I'm going to the mikveh in order to be able to. And not only that, the Mishnah says in Chagiga that if a kohen went to the mikveh bekavana to eat truma, and they know that they had no contact with any tuma post that mikveh, they're not allowed to eat kachim, because when they went to the mikveh, they didn't do it in order to eat kachim. So in other words, this din that we're learning about on Amud Aleph, it's a tefilla not to get rid of tuma, especially according to Ben Zayma, but it's more as I'm becoming even more pure. In order to go into the area of the temple, you have to have kavanah when you go to the mikveh. Now this is great. So the Braisa number 2, the Tavel al Das Bias Migdash. And by the way, according to Ben Zayma, you would still have to go to the mikveh on the 8th day, because he has a din. Today you're going in, you got to go to the mikveh. Only according to Rabbi Yehuda, that explains the whole din is only because of Srach Tumah, which is not Shayach when there's no Hesach Hadas. You already had kavanah al Bias Hamikdash, which is why Rabbi Yehuda says in Braisa number 2, this mitzvah can stick his ear in, he can stick his thumb in. And after the karbanis are done, he can actually enter. Braisa number 3, right, which the Rabbi Yehuda is saying that he has to go to the mikvah. Lishkas mitzvah is the loitavel al das bias hamikdash. He went on the 7th day, and he had no hesach hadas. Doesn't help. The mikvah that they instituted must be in order to enter. That mikveh he didn't have. And for that, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, he has to go. The Iba Yisema, that indeed you have to amend the 3rd Braisa, because we're not accepting this answer. Because at the end of the day, it's about Srach Tumah. Like, why do you have to have any kavana if you know that you're not tamei for sure? So, Iba Yisema, Tini, amend the 3rd Braisa, that loy mitzorayim amru. Don't say Lishkas Mitzrayim was for the Mitzrayim to go. The Mitzrayim did not go. Ella kol Adam. The Mitzrayim didn't have to go. All of that is Rabbi Yehuda L'Shitasei, which he holds that what? Which Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's all about Srach Tumah, and therefore he never has to go. Ravina Amar, Ravina gives another answer. That Rabbi, don't amend the Braisa, but Ravina, Rabbi Yehuda L'Divrem de Rabbanan Kamar Lahu. But easy is a lotion of love. Admit to me, my friend, at least that it's not only Mitzrayim, you can call it Lishkas Mitzrayim, but it's also Ela Kol Adam. All right, now hold on, V'Rabbanan. Now indeed, the Rabbanan, it's not that they are focusing on the Mitzrayim. It comes out in the 3rd Braisa that Rabbanan hold that Kol Adam did not use the mikvah. And now it's becoming clear that at least in the 3rd Braisa, that Rabbanan is arguing with our Stam Mishnah. Our Stam Mishnah says that any person that enters the Azara has to go to the mikvah. That Rabbanan hold it's not true. That Rabbanan hold that if a person knows that they're tahir, they don't have to go to the mikvah before they enter the Azara. They argue with the Mishnah. Now, why would the Mitzvah have to go? The Mitzvah went on the 7th day, and that will be the difference. V'Rabbanan Mitzvah, since Doyesh, he tramples, because during the time of him being a Mitzvah, he never distanced himself from a source of Tumah. He was Tumah anyway. So he let it go. He was not mindful about Tumah and Tara. Now I know that this is already after the 7th day, but after living for a week or 2 or more without having any mindfulness about Tumah and Tara, we are afraid that he might have become Tumah again. Since a mitzvah is doyish betuma, that's why he has to go to the mikveh. Even though he went on the 7th, go again on the 8th. But kol adam loy doyishe betuma. So wow. In other words, the chachamim of the 3rd Baraisa, they argue with our Mishnah. And now, Amalei Abayil and Rav Yosef, now that we learned the Mishnah, we learned the 1st Baraisa and Amud Aleph, we learned 2 Baraisas over here. The 3rd Baraisa clearly, as we just explained, is introducing this machloikis between Tanoim. What is the shita of the Rabbanan and Baraisa number 2? This is what Abaya asked Rabbi Yosef. Neima should we say that the Rabbanan of the 2nd Baraisa, right, mitzoyra toivel v'oime b'shan niknar. It sounds that he goes to the mikvah. The pligi allow the Rabbi Yehuda that Rabbanan they takas ascribed to Ben Zoyma Sfira Lahu. That every Yid midoiraisa has to go to the mikveh, because if the reason would be like Rabbi Yehuda, well, at least a Matzoyre would not have to go because there's no Srach Tuma. But is the Rabbanan clearly holding with our Mishnah, disagreeing with the Rabbanan of the 3rd Baraisa? The Rabbanan of the 2nd Baraisa will hold that every person always, even the Matzoyre, will have to go to the mikveh, as there's a din Torah. You're going into the Azara today, go to the mikveh today. V'hai the Tani Matzoyre, and the focus of the Matzoyre isn't only that every person has to go, but even that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Mitzvah doesn't have to go. Or Oidilma, now that we introduced the Chachamim of the 3rd Baraisa, that argues with our Mishnah, and the Chachamim of the 3rd Baraisa holds only a Mitzvah has to go, because Doyesh. But Kol Adam, if they know that they're tired, they don't have to go, maybe the 2nd Baraisa, which is Taka only speaking about a Mitzvah, the Chachamim there will agree with the Chachamim of the 3rd Baraisa against our Mishnah. Maybe again, Dilma Shani Mitzvah, the Doish Betuma. So the Chachamim of the 2nd will be the same Chachamim of the 3rd, and indeed that's Pshat. Amalei, indeed, Shani Mitzvah, the Doish Betuma. So the bottom line is that we have now a Gevaldike Machloikes Tanoim, whether there is such a rule of does every person ein adam nichnas azar lavayda afilo toir, right, be prior to Ache Yitvoil, and the shita of our Mishnah, we have the machlokes between Ben Zoyma and Rabbi Yehuda, what the reason is, and therefore lid Rabbi Yehuda, even according to the Tana of our Mishnah, a Mitzvah, especially if he was mindful that he's going to the mikveh in order to enter the Azara, will taka not have to go on the 8th day. Now let's chop another few lines over here. Amalei Abayil Rabbi Yosef. Now that we're having this conversation, let's go with the parentheses. Let Rabbi Yehuda again, that says that the reason of our Tana is not a doiraisa, but why do you have to go to the mikveh? The Amar Srach Tefilla, it's only as a reminder. Which means it's not such an important tefillah. This is a very big question, the top of Daf Lamed Aleph. Choitzitz or yeina choitzitz? So let's chazer the laws of chatzitza. Chatzitza means something that interposes between the flesh of the person and the waters of the mikveh. Mid'oiraisa, only something that is both interposing, being choitzitz on the majority of the body. There's something covering the majority of the body, and the person is bothered by it. The person is makbid. That is called a chatzitza mid'oiraisa. But if it's not both ruba and makbid, it's not a chatzitza. Midrabanan, oy ruba, oy makbid. And by the way, that's the machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid. Many Rishonim view the hair part of the body as a entity for itself. So if the majority of one's hair is, let's say, is knotted up, that's called a ruba, and the person is makbid, that's going to be a chatzitza mid'oiraisa. If we're going to view the hair as part of the rest of the body, even if the roiv of one's hair is knotted up, mid'oiraisa, even if you're makbid, it's not ruba umakbid. But midrabanan, it's either one or the other that affects a chatzitza. And as we speak out just again, that we are very machmir by nida, when a woman goes to the mikveh, even if it's not ruba, and she's not makbid. But if there is some chatzitza, lachatchila, don't do it. But b'diavad, right, if it's taka it's a minority, and she was not makbid, then it's not going to be a chatzitza. So coming back, all of those dinim, the chatzitza doiraisa, the chatzitza midrabanan, do we b'chlal apply din chatzitza to this din of the Mishnah? And that's a very important question. I'll give you an example. Nowadays, after the Takon of Ezra was abolished, nevertheless, many people have a minig to go Tefillas Ezra. There is a keri, there's a seminal emission. They're gonna begin the day by going to the mikvah. Nowadays, we're not that careful in Hilchas Chatzitza for men. Why? Because it's not an obligatory mikvah. So the question is, when the Rabbanon, now Rabbi Yehuda is not a minik. Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda is not ben zoyma. It's not a din do'iraisa, but it's a Rabbanon. So how do we view the importance of dinei chatzitza when it comes to a tefillah that's only mid Rabbanon? Chaytzitz or ain't chaytzitz? So Amalei responds Rabbi Yosef to Abaye. We'll conclude with this. This is the rule. It's a Rabbanon. Called the takan Rabbanon ke'ein do'iraisa takun. That's the klal. Whenever the Chachamim instituted, whenever they enacted a rule, they did it in the same manner as Dinei Torah. So whatever is considered the Chatzitza, the Oraisa, or the Rabbanon, by a Tefillah the Oraisa will be a Chatzitza, even according to Rebbe Yehuda, the more lenient opinion, Benegea this Tefillah that we all have to do prior to entering the temple complex. But again, if the going to the mikveh isn't even a Takanas Rabbanon, which is again Tefillas Ezra, after we are no longer bound by it, so then indeed, we are very lenient when it comes to dinim of chatzitza. Chevra, God willing, to be continued.